Washington, December 2nd, AP. American shipbuilders moved nearer President Roosevelt's 1942 objective of 8 million tons of new cargo vessels, the Maritime Commission said today, by delivering 84 vessels totaling 891,700 deadweight tons in November. The month's shipyard production raised this year's total to 625 vessels of 6,890 tons, leaving 1,100,000 tons to be delivered in December if the President's blueprint for victory goal is to be met. The Commission said its December schedules indicate the shipyards will turn out the required tonnage. This would mean a record-breaking achievement of 100 vessels or more in December. West Coast yards again led by delivering 48 vessels. East Coast yards followed with 20 vessels. Gulf Coast yards 13, and the Great Lakes produced 1. In addition, 2 special-type vessels were produced for the armed forces. Henry J. Kaiser's Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation at Portland tied for individual honors with the California Shipbuilding Corporation of Wilmington, California. Each yard delivered 13 vessels. Vancouver, Washington, April 5th. The first aircraft carrier ever launched on the West Coast slid into the Columbia River today, carrying with it the high hopes of President Roosevelt that the fleet of which it is the vanguard would play a vital part in the United Nations prosecution of the war. As the Alazon Bay, built according to a new design in the Vancouver yard of the Kaiser Company, left her way, more than 30,000 cheering spectators saw 11 sister carriers in various stages of construction on adjacent ways. Although previous reports had labeled this type of carrier as designed cheaply for convoy duty, Henry J. Kaiser, the builder, described the Alazon Bay as the first of a great fleet of floating airports, which may in truth carry the battle to the enemy in his own land. Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt smashed a bottle of champagne against the nose of the new warship. "I have a message from my husband, the President," she said. He asked me to say to the Kaiser management how deeply he appreciates the wonderful work it is doing, and to say to the men and women workers in this shipyard how deeply he understands the effort which they are putting into their work, which means the more rapid ending of the war. Making ships is an absolute necessity, making them to carry supplies needed by our men and our allies throughout the world. You are doing it magnificently, and I wish you good health and good luck. President Roosevelt's deep interest in this new type of carrier, most of the specifications are military secrets, was evidenced further in Mr. Kaiser's speech. The shipbuilder inferred that it was at the direction of the President that the Maritime Commission ordered the fleet built. Let it now be said, Mr. Kaiser remarked, that this great fleet of carriers is the material evidence of the faith and confidence of the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States. In the very moment when this ship seems to feel the thrill of life along her keel, the materials for another will be moving up by plan and direction towards these ways. If all the channels through which flow the essential supplies are kept open, your efforts could be rewarded from 3 to 6 times every month by a similar christening, and an ancient prophecy might be fulfilled that these, your children of iron and steel, will speak with the enemy at the gate. Mr. Kaiser's promise of 3 to 6 carriers a month, that is, up to 1 every 5 days, was dependent, associates emphasized, upon materials and manpower. The next carrier, it was indicated, would be launched late this month. Mr. Kaiser laid the plans on Mr. Roosevelt's desk on March 18th. The Alazon Bay had been on the way slightly more than 4 months, but shipyard spokesmen said that the time from keel laying to launching could be cut to 60 days if there was no let-up in the supplies. Delivery of the first carrier is expected by June 15th. The Alazon Bay, named for an inlet 20 miles south of Corpus Christi, Texas, has a waterline length of 487 feet and a flight deck of 514 feet, giving the new flat top an appearance of greater size than the Liberty ships, which some of the Kaiser yards have been building with record-breaking speed. Disclosure of the new warship's armament, speed, and plane cargo capacity was withheld, but newspapermen escorted over the vessel prior to the launching were told that the Alazon Bay was going down the way 65% completed. It obviously represented a building task requirement of considerably more precision than the mass-produced Liberty ship. Spectators who noticed that the Alazon Bay listed somewhat as she hit the water were assured at a luncheon by Edgar F. Kaiser, Henry Kaiser's son and general manager of the 3 Kaiser yards in the Portland industrial area, that when the superstructure was added, the carrier would assume an even keel. The President's wife found people more war-conscious than when she last visited the West Coast last year, attributing this to more restrictions and taxes. Governors Arthur B. Langley of Washington and Earl Snell of Oregon and Commissioner Thomas M. Woodward of the Maritime Commission shared in the launching ceremony. Pascagoula, Mississippi, May 28th. Miss Vera Anderson, 19-year-old Ingall shipyard worker, became Champion Woman Welder of America today, defeating Mrs. Hermina Sturmiska of Henry J. Kaiser's Oregon shipyard for the title. The winner, who quit a job as waitress to become a welder, won in a contest which included flat, vertical, and overhead welding. She received a 2-foot sterling loving cup from the local Ingalls yard where she became a welder. Another prize was $300 in war bonds, and still another was a visit Monday at the White House with Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Mrs. Roosevelt issued a personal invitation to the champion. The idea of escort carriers, aircraft carriers that provided air cover for convoys, had been discussed since the 1920s. They were smaller, slower, and more vulnerable than big fleet carriers, but they could be built quickly and in great numbers. President Franklin Roosevelt was their chief advocate. The first escort carriers were converted cruisers and transports, but in 1942, Henry J. Kaiser proposed a program of mass-produced, purpose-built escort aircraft carriers. The first of these, the USS Alazon Bay, was launched on April 5, 1943. Before being commissioned in June, it was renamed the USS Casablanca CVE 55. She became the lead ship in a class of 50 carriers built by Kaiser Shipbuilding in Vancouver. The Kaiser-class escort carriers provided plane transport and air cover for ground assaults throughout the war in the Pacific. Their finest hour came during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, when Task Force Taffy 3, consisting of destroyers, destroyer escorts, and 6 Casablanca-class carriers, turned away a far larger Japanese fleet. The Casablanca never saw combat, but traveled the Pacific for 3 years moving men and materiel. She was decommissioned in 1946. She and all the other escort carriers were scrapped after the war. The escort carrier model that Henry Kaiser presented to President Roosevelt is now in the FDR ship model collection at the National Archives. Kaiser Shipbuilding closed after the war. Vestiges of the Vancouver shipyard can still be seen on the banks of the Columbia River. To the east is a small memorial to the shipyard, and to the west is a sculpture named Wendy Rose that pays tribute to the women welders who worked there. Pascagoula, Mississippi, October 3, 2013. Vera Anderson was petite and soft-spoken, and her family said those who met her would never dream that she won the title of World's Champion Welder during World War II while working at Ingalls Shipbuilding in Pascagoula. Anderson, who died recently in Ridgeland at age 90, was 19 when she competed against female welding champions from Oregon and California. In 1943, she won the title in the first Women's National Welding Championship, along with $300 in war bonds and a trip to the White House. I was invited to have tea with Mrs. Roosevelt. She talked about what a contribution the women were making to the war effort, Anderson later said. Anderson was very modest about her experiences, said her daughter-in-law Tina Anderson of Hattiesburg. Details of her experiences were shared only when Ingalls celebrated the company's 60-year anniversary in 1998, and Vera and her family were invited to the celebration. She recalled at the time, newspapers and radios stressed that women were needed in the war effort. I became a welder. In Personality of the Month profile for Temple Baptist Church in Hattiesburg in 2003, Anderson said that after her father died when she was 11, her family moved from Sumrall to Gulfport. She graduated from high school in 1941. She and her sister, Minnie Anderson of Gulfport, entered a training program and upon finishing welding school, went to work at Ingall's in 1942. Vera Anderson proved to be one of the most earnest, adaptable, and skillful workers in welding, the late Monroe Landier, longtime Ingalls president, once said. One highlight of my experience at Ingalls was a local contest, and then a similar national contest to determine the champion woman welder based upon speed, quality, and workmanship, Anderson said. She became the Gulf Coast welding champion, and that brought a challenge from the Vancouver yard of Kaiser's Shipbuilding Company, which claimed the West Coast champion, Hermina Stermiska. She won that challenge on May 28, 1943. Moore Dry Dock and Shipbuilding Company of Oakland, California, then claimed that the previous contestant was not the West Coast champion. On January 24, 1944, Anderson kept her crown by outwelding Edna Slocum. Anderson also met her husband, Anselin Harrison McDonald of Jackson, while he was an electrician. They married in September 1944 at Hansborough Baptist Church. She quit her job but returned to Ingalls in 1945 until Mac was discharged from the Army when the war ended.